So, good evening, everybody. Shalom, and thank you for joining me here tonight on this journey of the soul. For those friends from far and near, those friends that are new, and those friends that are old, I'm Rabbi David Vigler, and I'm the rabbi here at the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens. We're making lemonade out of lemons out of this difficult time when we're all trying to get our vaccines. We're making lemonade by being able to reach out to even more people than ever before, by being able to learn with friends and family wherever you are through this medium of Zoom. It's not as good as meeting in person, but it's a lot better than not meeting at all. So here we are gathered together. The nice thing is also the class is recorded, so you're able to refresh it, to rewatch it if there was something that you wanted to watch over again. And we have some families that are here with us, which is really nice to see how the whole Virginia crew, Warren and Helen Alec, have brought their daughter Deborah and their sister Janice, right? Got that right? And I know that Alyssa Macher, she was talking to her sister about, her sister-in-law, I think it was, about tonight's class. And she was convinced that it was a class coming from a cemetery because it's coming from Jewish gardens. Apparently, wherever your sister-in-law is, maybe Pennsylvania somewhere, is
Washington, D.C.
New Jersey. So Jewish gardens sounds like a cemetery. So I said, you know what? We also have a cemetery here, but our garden is where we grow living souls. We prefer to grow the living and nurture the lives of the living, which is what this class is all about. And I'm grateful that Cindy was able to join us. I believe that Cindy's husband, if I'm not mistaken, was the Rebbe's foot doctor.
Oh, no, that's my brother. Our brother.
Oh, brother, someone else.
Our brother.
Our brother.
Cindy is my sister. Elliot is our brother.
Okay, gotcha. Fantastic. Very good.
Yeah.
And to all of our friends here tonight, it's very, very special to be here with you. Thank you for joining me here tonight. I'm going to go straight into it with just asking if you could just turn off your cell phones. We'll try to focus here for the next 90 minutes of this presentation to be able to make it meaningful. It's quite emotional because many of the people that are here with us here tonight, many of you, some of you have lost a loved one very, very recently. And it's unthinkably difficult to process. I cannot imagine how hard it must be to lose a loved one like that, to lose a child, to lose a spouse, to lose a parent. But tonight, we've gathered here together to learn about those mysteries, the mysteries of life and death, whether it's our own mortality that we're facing or the mortality of our loved ones. These are vital questions. As Rob Berger said to me, he says, you know, Rabbi, when you reach a certain age and you're playing on the back nine, you want to know what's going on in the clubhouse. He said, you want to know what they're serving for lunch off the golf course. And you know what? None of us know how long we're going to live. None of us know how much time we've been given. So as Americans, we like to plan ahead. You know, you go on a vacation, you like to know what kind of clothing to pack. Is it snowing there? Is it raining? Is it beach weather, right? You want to know what to pack. So when you prepare to leave this world also, whether it's for yourself or for a loved one, you want to know, like, how do we pack? How do we prepare? What is this all about? What goes on the other side? Tonight, in this course that we're beginning tonight, we have three primary objectives. First of all, philosophical and theological. From a theological perspective, we'll be talking about the purpose of death, what happens to the soul. We'll be talking about ideas such as heaven and hell and reincarnation. Many Jewish people don't think that reincarnation is even a Jewish belief. We'll be spending all of lesson 5 of this series talking about reincarnation and what the Torah tells us about it. So the philosophical and theological parts of this course will be addressing our mind and soul, addressing our heart from an emotional perspective. We'll be talking about the personal anxieties of our own mortality, as well as the unspeakable grief of losing a loved one. And on a practical level, we'll be talking about how we actually prepare for the passing general practices of the funeral, of the Shiva, of the mourning, technical details that we'll be addressing. We'll hopefully be giving them meaning through this course, through the 6 sessions of this course. Is everybody able to hear me? You able to hear me? Thumbs up. I see Lisa's having some trouble. We're not on YouTube, Meira. Ashley, if you could just address the issues on the chat box, please. Thank you.
We're good on Zoom, Rabbi.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Great. Okay, good. So first question I'd like to ask you, if you would share with me one word that death makes you think of. Tonight's class will be addressing death. We'll be demystifying death. We'll be talking about life and the transition to death, and hopefully overcoming the fear of death. So I'd like to ask you, if you could share with me, maybe in the chat box, one word that death brings to mind for you, unless you want to share it out loud. Anybody?
Peaceful.
Peaceful. Fear, says owner. Okay. Fear,
Final.
finality, final. Peaceful is an interesting one from you, Susan. Very you got to be in a place of serenity to be able to reach that. That's good for you. So we've got
Unknown.
finality is a
Unknown.
very, very challenging word. You know, finality is like how awful it is. It's all over. If death is final,
Unknown.
unknown. Okay, hopefully we'll be addressing that one, Corey, in the class tonight. Rest, which would be more about peace, right? Legacy, gone.
Journey.
What was that last one?
Journey.
Journey. See, that's very, very different. You know, when you say something about final stop, like Sherry just said, compared to journey. You know, journey and final stop is polar opposites. Is it the final stop, or is it a stop on some sort of a journey? You probably have figured out by now that the name of this course is The Journey of the Soul, is hopefully going to take us from a state of mind where you are final stop, gone, the end of the road, saying goodbye, to be able to evolve that, to mature that perspective to one which is beyond loss, one which is a journey, peace, and some other ideas that were brought up here. But most certainly these words that were mentioned, like fear. Fear, I think, captures it all. It's a very powerful word that was said of that. I forget exactly who said it, but fear is a very powerful word that comes to mind over here. How scary it is to die, to lose a loved one. And that's exactly what we're going to be addressing here tonight. We'll be addressing the fear of death, which actually has a word for it in the English language. It's called thanatophobia.
Just heard that.
Thanatophobia is an actual word, which means the fear of death. That is, I'm going to try to share with you here on the screen for a moment. Yeah. So this fear of death is actually more common than you think. I'd like to ask you to please turn in your textbooks to text number 1. It's on page 3 by an article, an excerpt by a Stanford University psychologist. Let's take a look at this. Text number 1, page 3, about the fear of death. Mortality has haunted us from the very beginning of history. 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh, who lived, by the way, several centuries before Abraham, reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, quote, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart. I am afraid of death." Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masqueraded as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment. Recently, some psychologists developed something called TMT, which is terror management theory. Terror management theory which states that our awareness of death influences many aspects of our lives, especially right now during this pandemic, which has provided the perfect storm of fear and anxiety associated with our own mortality. How do we cope with TMT, terror management theory? Is primarily by denying it or totally ignoring it. The problem with this COVID-19 pandemic is that we hear about it all of the time on the news, in the newspapers, from our friends. We cannot ignore it. And that's why the anxiety levels about our mortality, of our thanatophobia, are through the roof. And that's why it was so important for us to present this course here during the pandemic, the journey of the soul, to hopefully assuage our fears, calm our concerns, and provide meaning to the madness, to allow us to have more purpose in the path that we're leading. In 2019, there was a survey conducted about the fear of death. You can see it on your textbook on page number 4, where you'll see that 25% of the people surveyed, 1 out of 4 were completely unafraid. Another quarter were not very afraid. Another quarter were somewhat afraid, and 11% were very afraid. So this is a real thing. And that's why the 6 weeks course is so important. As you'll see, it's really not a morbid course. It's really a very inspiring course. It's an electrifying course about life and its value. So is death the end? Final stop on the journey? Is it goodbye? Is it no turning back? Is it the end of who we are? It all depends on how we identify ourselves. It all depends on who you believe, who you think that you are. You know, Jackie Mason has a routine about a psychiatrist. A guy who visits the psychiatrist, and the doctor evaluates him and gives him an analysis. He says, you've got an identity problem. We've got to figure out the real you. That's going to be $100. So the patient says to the doctor, he says, 1 second, if we can't figure out who the real me is, then maybe you are I and I am you, and you're the one that owes me the $100, right? So we've got to set this clear. We've got to set the record straight to understand who's who are we really, in which case we'll be able to get some clarity into what life is about so that we can understand the impact that death has upon us. Now, from a Jewish perspective, death is not the end. It's the beginning of a new phase. Now, this is not what we think is from the way we see things. Death seems to be so final. It seems to be the last stop. But really, it's the beginning of a new phase. To properly understand this, we need to re-examine our definition of life. And no matter what kind of person you are, whether you're cerebral, whether you're emotional, losing a loved one forces us to face exactly these questions. Now, the key lies in the writings of the Kabbalah. I'm going to share with you a few texts coming up right now that are hopefully going to reframe our perception of death upside down. Let's take a look at one of the most vital transformational texts in this series, The Journey of the Soul. It's on page 5, text number 2. This text comes from Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was the student of the famous Arizal. The Arizal was probably the most influential Kabbalist of the past 1,000 years. He's buried in Tzfat, in the city of Safed in the north of Israel. He passed away at a very, very young age. And his writings, the writings of Kabbalah, transformed our perception and an understanding of the Kabbalah. Until the time of the Arizal, the Kabbalah was unintelligible and impossible to understand. What he did is that he made it much easier for the layman to be able to relate to. So let's take a look at how Reb Chaim Vital explains this, quoting the Arizal. Again, we're on page 5, text number 2. The wise are aware that the human body is not the human being. When we speak of the human being, we're referring to the human's inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn in this world. Our body is not the real me. We can say, I have a body. But to say that I am my body is as absurd as saying that I am my Toyota or I am my Mercedes. That's absurd. If anybody told you I am a car, you'd be ridiculous. You're the driver, you're not the car. Same thing goes for our body. The body is merely the vehicle in which the soul is dressed or gets around during its lifetime in this world. I am my soul, my neshama. Everything else is just accessories. And with this idea is fundamental. It's transformational. It's important for us to internalize this idea as we begin the journey of the soul. And Tanya teaches us, the Tanya, which is the foundational text of Chabad philosophy. We just learned this in chapter 42, for those of you that study with me on a Tuesday morning on YouTube and Facebook, that what we focus on in our focused thoughts becomes our feelings. We feel what we think about. We feel in our heart what we think about for extended periods of time. So for that reason, I'd like to present you now with a 4-minute meditation. Instead of this text number 2 here coming in one ear and straight out the other, we're going to try to spend 4 minutes going through this meditation right here with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Shais Taub, a noted speaker, philosopher, and thinker of Jewish philosophy. Here goes. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear. Can you hear?
Hi, this is Rabbi Shais Taub. Welcome to a series of meditations for the course, Journey of the Soul. The purpose of these meditations is going to be internalizing some of the deeper ideas that are a little bit difficult to grasp. And generally, we will try to do so by way of visualization, trying to picture symbols that represent some of the ideas and that we can focus on briefly so that we can begin to connect on a deeper level to these ideas. To begin with, the entire notion of life is a challenging concept because it is so intangible. We're used to relating to things, to that which we can see, to that which we can touch. And life is completely intangible. How do we begin to relate to that which is unseeable, untouchable? How do we envision, how do we see the unseeable? So if you will, I'll ask you to begin right now, however you're most comfortable doing so. Close your eyes, keep your eyes open. Envision a musical instrument, a physical object, let's say a piano, made of wood and wires, something you can look at with your physical eyes, you can touch it with your physical hands. It's a physical object. Now, the piano is merely a thing. A person comes over to the piano, the pianist sits down and begins playing a beautiful song. Now, this song stirs your soul. Try to hear it. Hear the music. Where is the song? Can you see it? Can you touch it? You can see and touch the piano. You can't see or touch the song. And now the song is over and the piano is standing there. If you'll open up the piano, will you find the song? Think now how everything in the world is matter and energy. The matter is the physical object that we see. the piano. The energy is the intangible, the song. We'll take a half a minute now to try to think of ourselves in these terms. Think of your body as the instrument, the physical object that can be seen, that can be touched. And think of the life you live as the song that is being played through the instrument. Take half a minute right now to see and hear the piano and the song, the body and the soul.
It turns out, therefore, that when we ask ourselves, who am I? We realize that I'm not my body. I'm not the piano. I'm not the matter. My body is not who I am. I am my soul. Now, there are many ideas that we pretend to understand. We pretend to understand electricity, medicine. When somebody talks about the theory of relativity, we shake our heads as if we know what we're talking about because we have a little bit of context. But we don't really know what these things are. Do we really know what the soul actually is? We have limitations, like a blind man trying to understand what a color is, or like a deaf man who's trying to understand what sound is. But yet, as mortal beings in this world, in a world of definition, we are still able to know some things about the soul. How? Based upon what the Torah tells us. Let's see what the Torah tells us about this soul, which is the real I, the real me. Let's turn to page 6, text 3a, Genesis, in the beginning of the creation of man and woman. Text 3a is on page 6 of your textbook. It reads as follows: God formed the human of soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils a neshama, a soul of life. And the human being became a living being. Now, that's what happened on the 6th day of creation. But a couple hours before that, on the 6th day of creation, God created the animals. Let's take a look at text 3b, how God created the animals. It says, God said, let the earth bring forth living beings of differing species, cattle, creeping things, and the beasts of the earth, according to their species, and it was so. Can you identify the difference between the way that animals were created and the way that man was created? Anybody?
Sure.
Based upon these two texts?
Sure.
What is that?
Well,
Hashem didn't breathe the into the nostrils. It doesn't
like
say
God breathed.
Okay, the nostrils is different. Okay, what else?
the neshama. It doesn't say neshama anywhere.
It doesn't say neshama anywhere. 1 second. Okay, fine. Is there any other difference that you might pick up over here? Anybody else picking up any other differences?
Animals came from the earth.
So did man. Martha?
Not
It says he took the earth of soil. Well, the difference, my friends, is if you look closely, you'll see that whereas animals were created already alive, they were created living beings. Look, God said that the earth bring forth living beings. Man was not created alive. Man was first formed from the soil of the earth, and only after there was a body did God breathe into his nostrils a soul of life, which means that mankind, this is man and woman, obviously, man and woman, human beings were created in a two-step process. What that tells us is something fascinating, that when it comes to a human being, the life within us was inserted into our body. It has nothing to do with our body. Our body is not alive. The life was placed into the body. Take a look at text 3a. God formed the human of the soil from the earth and then breathed into his nostrils. There was already a nose, a head, a body. And into the nostrils, he breathed a soul of life. Beforehand, the body was dead. It's only because the soul of life is inside the body. That's why you're alive. What this teaches us is something profound. Is that just like our body and soul were separate at birth, our body and soul are separate at death. They have very little to do with each other. It's like God making an unlikely shidduch. What's a shidduch? A shidduch is a marriage. He takes a body, a piece of flesh, and he takes an angel, which is a soul, and he stuffs them together, and he says, you guys are going to live together for the next 32 or 102 years. But that doesn't mean that we are one and the same. The body is a dead corpse, and the soul is a living piece of God. So just like the body and the soul were separate at birth, they are also separate. They're also separate at death. Second. Here it is. So on the screen, well, we just explained that. So the human was body formed from the earth, the soul was inserted into the body, and the animal, the life and the body were created together. Sorry. Okay. So it turns out that the soul doesn't actually die when the body dies. The soul in the body is like a stranger in a foreign land. When the body is no longer alive, instead of us thinking of that as final, the last stop, you're right, it's final. You're right, it's the last stop if all you're talking about is the body. If all you're talking about is about the part that you see, yes, the body gets buried in the ground. But when we realize that the body was never alive in the first place, you realize that the life is the soul, death is no longer final. Because at this point, we realize that the soul continues on the journey, even though the body can no longer continue. I like to explain it as if you're getting into your vehicle, you're getting into your Volkswagen. No, not a Volkswagen. Let's say you're getting into your Toyota, it's a Japanese car. Well, whatever. And then you go to Publix, right? So you go into Publix, you park the car in the parking lot, and you leave the car in the parking lot, and then you walk into Publix. Nobody in their right mind would say that you're now no longer alive because you left the car in the parking lot. No, I left the car where the car belongs. And now I, the pedestrian, I'm walking into Publix. That's what happens when the death is the time when the body can no longer continue on the journey, reaches the parking lot, you leave the body here, and now the soul continues on the journey. Take a look at this most profound text from the Chizkuni, the commentary of the Chizkuni, page number 7, text 3c, which explains this in the most beautiful way. He explains this creation of man, where he says that God did what he had not done with any other creature. God blew into Adam. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit and a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body perishes. Friends, this is a game-changing perspective. Our soul is immortal. Our soul cannot die. The body is mortal. The body is finite. The body dies. But our soul doesn't ever die. Now, some interesting questions are being posted of you. I want to address those questions in the chat box. So, when does the soul enter the body? Nancy's asking. Is it at birth? You know, that's an interesting discussion there, Nancy. If you ask an evangelical Christian, they'll tell you that life begins at the moment of conception, right? Abortion is absolutely prohibited. If you ask an average American, they'll probably tell you that life begins sometime around birth, right? But if you ask a Jewish mother when life begins, you know when life begins?
Medical school degree.
When he graduates from medical school and he moves out of the house.
Right.
Right. So, but to answer your question, Nancy, so when does the soul enter the body? The answer is that this is actually a question that Antoninus, the Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, asked of Rabbi Yehuda the Prince in the Talmud.
Okay,
The
good
answer
luck.
was at conception, the soul does begin at 40 days from conception, to be more precise, which is when the prohibition of abortion begins in Jewish law. 40 days after conception. And that's very roughly, very close to the way American law is in most states right now, which is about, it's about 40 days, depending on how you count. We count a little differently to the way Americans count, because we count from the last period as opposed to the moment of conception. But without getting into that, it's roughly like that in abortion laws. But the point I'm trying to make is that the soul does enter in stages, and the final entry of the soul is at the time of bar and bat mitzvah. So when a boy turns 13 and a girl turns 12, that's the final stage of entry. It's a whole process, the bris and everything else, right? So another question coming in. Animals have no soul. My cat has a soul, says Cindy. Her cat has a soul. Very good. And you know, you look at these animals and they certainly seem to have a soul. So is there a doggy heaven or not, right? So the answer, generally speaking, is that every creation does have a soul of sorts, a divine spark. And the soul of every creature is different, tailored to its specification and function. The difference is that only human souls retain their distinct individual identity after the soul's passing. The souls of other creatures are subsumed upon death into their divine sources. In the case of animals, the divine source is the animal within the divine chariot, what's known as the Merkava, if you want to get Kabbalistic, and that would be the origin of souls of animals, and that's where the animal souls are. So yes, there is such a thing as an animal soul. What is the proof, asked Jonathan, that the soul doesn't die? What is the proof text? So I thought I shared that. The proof text that the soul doesn't die is text 3c. I thought I shared that with you, right? Text 3c, it's on page 7, right? In general, as we learn in Tanya, the soul is a piece of God. Remember, you know, if you want to go just a little bit more deeper into this, Jonathan, I'd say like this. If you go back to text 3a, right? It says that God blew into his nostrils a spirit of life. Now, every detail in Torah is precise. There is no such thing as a metaphor or a rhyme or something which we do just to make things look nice. Everything is precise in God's Torah. So when it says in God's Torah that God blew the spirit of life into man's nostrils, what that means is, just like when we blow, what happens when you blow? You get very tired. Why? Because you're putting your kishkis into there. I can talk for hours and hours and hours. You know that I can do that, right? I can talk for hours, right? But when you blow, you can't blow very long. Got a few seconds and you're kaput because you're blowing out your kishkis. When God blows the spirit of life into Adam, it means that he's putting his essence himself into Adam. And that would be the source text from 3a, the way it's explained in Tanya. Anyways, so sorry, was there another question coming in? Where does the soul go? Does the soul retain memories of its past lives? That and is the subject of lesson 2. So I'm going to save that for lesson 2. Back to the trajectory here. Okay, let's talk about some of our conclusions. So far we've learned that the real me is not my body. The body's just a garment. The real me doesn't actually need the body at all. It just happened to have been infused into this particular body, into this particular garment. It's like when you go to the car rental, you know, you want to say, should I take a level 1 car, level 2 car, level 3 car? You pick your car. So we could have picked our bodies as far as essence is concerned. Our soul just needs a ride inside of our bodies. The soul is the source of the life of the body. And the soul is not caused by the body, right? It's the cause of the body's life. And though it lives in the body for a while, the soul does not depend on the body, right? After we die, the body dies. It's the body that dies, but the soul is immortal and it does not perish. The body, however, has no independent life, but the soul does have an independent life, as I just pointed out from Jonathan's question. The soul is a piece of God. It's eternal. It's forever, as the Chizkuni in text 3c explained. The real me, friends, is eternal. As I look at you here on the screen, and as I see precious friends that have lost loved ones, whether it was recently or a very long time ago, that pain, that wound doesn't seem to go away. As my mother says in Yiddish, nicht mehr gedacht, we should never know of such tsaris, of such problems. But I want to encourage you to consider this transformational thought and realization that if it's your child that passed, they are still alive. The real loved one is alive. It's only their bodies that are broken. And I want to remind you of the meditation that we do when we tear the clothing at the funeral. Why do we tear the garment at the funeral? I'm not talking about the American shtick, which is to tear a black ribbon, because God forbid you can't afford to tear your nice coat. It's your mother, for heaven's sake. We can spare the coat, we can tear the jacket, right? How many mothers do you have, right? So when we tear the garment, the kriya, it's a very important meditation for us to realize that the reason that we tear the garment is for us to internalize and understand that it's only the externality of our loved one that is broken. It is just like when I tear my garment, it's my clothing that's broken, but me, I'm still intact. So too with our loved ones, it's only their shell, it's only their garment, it's only their clothing, their body that is no longer functional, but their soul is absolutely forever. Are we alive? Doris is asking, alive only in our memories? The answer is absolutely not. We're alive actually. This is not just a matter of legacy. It's not just a matter of being remembered as a picture on the wall or because of some charitable contributions that you made to others. This is not about that. This is about essence, Doris. It's about effectively being alive essentially, whilst not on a visible level. It means that just like God is eternal, so too you are absolutely, you and I and our loved ones are all absolutely eternal. Are there no wheelchairs in heaven? The questions are coming in fast and furious over here. I'm trying to keep up. Do non-Jews have souls similar to Jews? The answer in general is, from Rob, is that they do have souls similar to Jews. The answer is yes. Yes. Okay.
Not a Jewish soul, right? It's not a Jewish soul.
It's not a Jewish soul. It's a different kind of soul. But in the context of this conversation, yes, absolutely. Do we pick or choose our parents? The answer is absolutely yes. The soul before being born knows its mission in this world. We'll be discussing this later in the course. So just to touch on it, the answer is yes. And we pick our parents based upon what we know is our mission in this world. It's subconscious when you enter into a body. There are no wheelchairs in heaven. Nope, because we don't have a body. Reincarnation is my late mom, who my son is named after. Did she come back as him in some ways? I'm going to ask you, please, to save that thought for lesson 5, because I would hate to do your question injustice by addressing the reincarnation issue right now. All of lesson 5 is dedicated to reincarnation. Now, let's develop this theme a little bit. So death is not the end. Death is just the next phase. I'd like to introduce you to a beautiful song. It's an English song that I'm going to play for you right now, which is called Come With Me, Little Neshamah. It describes the journey of the soul from when it's up in heaven and it's being notified by the angel, you're up to bat. You've been chosen, get into the elevator. We're sending you downstairs. You're coming into a human body. And we'll learn in the song the reluctance of the soul to enter into this world. The soul does not want to enter into a human body. And the conversation, it's going to be a very interesting song to play. Just to let you know that as the song plays, if you want to follow the song, or if you're more text-based, you can also, the same idea is reflected in text number 4 on page 8. So I'm just going to share that with you right now. Here with me, I'm just going to a different screen. Okay, so it's a 7-minute song. Here goes. The subtitles are at the bottom of the screen.
Come with me, little Neshama.
Neshamala means a soul.
Let me hold you in my hands. We will fly away, you and I together, to a place down on the land. Come with me, little Neshama. Don't shy away, do as you're told. There's a little child waiting to be born today. You're to be his spark, his soul. Oh, dear mother, no, I don't want to go. There's so much pain on the earth below. Let me stay up in heaven, where it's safe and I'll be pure. Please don't make me go. Can't you see I'm so afraid? Go with me, little Neshama. It's time you face your destiny. Fly beneath the clouds, now I will show you. There is so much you can be. Yes, there is all I can see. To do so over there. Someone learning to love. There's another need to pray. I will stay here if you answer me. It's all I need to know. You must promise me that I do be like that. Little Neshama. Oh, it's a path that I must through. As I tap you on the lip, you will forget me. You're on your own, it's up to you. and let me hold you in my hand. And we'll fly away, you and I together, to a place above the land. But tomorrow, I don't want to go. I'm not ready to go with you. Where you take me, I don't know. Let me stay right where I am. There's so much more for me to do. Please don't make me go. Can't you see I'm so afraid? Come with me, little Michelle. I've only come to take you home. There is no need to fear your destination. Turn the flames right by the throne. The place right by the throne.
A beautiful song. I hope you enjoyed that of the story, a manifestation of a malachal, the angel that speaks to the neshama, and the neshama is so afraid. It doesn't want to go down there. You'll see that in text number 4, as the soul does not want to leave its pleasure and its peace and its love up in heaven. Why would I want to go down there? How do I know that I'll be good? Maybe I'll be tempted. Maybe I'll be seduced. Maybe I'll be drawn in the wrong direction. Maybe I'll hang with the wrong company. How do I know that I'll manage? And the angel says, I'm sorry, you're on your own. You're going to have to work it out. The soul, when we realize that not only is our body not the be all and end all of who we are, it's only the vehicle, and that our real sense of self doesn't even want to be there. It doesn't want to come in. Our perspective starts to shift. Take a look at text number 5, where the Mishnah in Ethics of the Fathers tells us in page number 10 that this world is just like a corridor before the palace, before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. You know, the corridor is just a preparation. The end of the corridor is not the end. You don't hit a brick wall. There's a door there. You open the corridor. Now you go into the party. Now you're going into the palace. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. If you think you're having a good time here, the Torah tells us this is nada, gurnished mit gurnished, compared to the pleasure that's going on up in heaven. And that's the reason it changes our perspective as we realize that the soul is not physical. It's not interested in being here. And death, therefore, death is coming home. The real me is not my body. It's my eternal soul, and it's unaffected by birth and by death. So does this mean that the Torah encourages a flippant approach to life? Why would God send us here in the first place if that's the case? Like, why are we here anyways? If we don't want to go there and there's no point in going there, then why are we here? You know, Radvaz was a commentary 600-700 years ago, lived in Muslim lands. And he writes of the Muslim practices that he observed that forbid displays of mourning, of bereavement. Because in the Muslim ideology, there's nothing wrong with death. Mothers actually encourage their children to, and sometimes in jihadi circles, tragically, they actually encourage their kids to die because it's much better on the other side. They have this approach where life is flippant. They don't really respect life so much, only in these extremist circles, because because they figured it's much better on the other side. We're just wasting our time over here. And today we see the tragic results of such an ideology. You can actually see this article this commentary from Radvaz in Appendix A. It's on page 23 at the end of lesson 1, if you want to check it out later. But this is very, very far from the Jewish perspective towards life. So as we're getting some perspective on what death is, we're also starting to realize that life in this world at least, is not just happenstance. It's not just by the way. Life actually is paramount. In our philosophy, in Judaism, life is paramount and death is a tragedy. You know that the greatest mitzvah you can do is to save the life of another human being. There's a mitzvah, v'nishmartem lenafshei seichem. You have to guard your souls. You have to protect your souls. And if you're sick, you got to go to a doctor. If there's an epidemic going on, you got to check with your medical professionals to work out what to do about quarantine and shutting down the shuls and staying home and God knows whatever else you need to do, because we have to preserve human life. Maimonides tells us even further. In text number 6, you surely have heard of this famous law from Maimonides. Text number 6, he says that the importance of human life overrides all the commandments of the Torah. If someone puts a gun to your head and he says, God forbid, eat the bacon or I'll kill you, what are you supposed to do? You got to eat the bacon, because human life is more important. Right? Take a look. Text number 6, page 12. If a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed, because the Torah states concerning the mitzvahs, a person shall do them and live by them, v'chai bahem. One should live by the commandments and not die because of the commandments. Indeed, this applies no matter how much life you've got left in you. Even someone that's 112 years old with some chronic illness, God forbid, if you're able to preserve their life by a little bit longer, you've done the greatest mitzvah and you're allowed to violate all the commandments in order to preserve their life, even if it's for another 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, or 10 months. Turns out, therefore, that the soul occupation is less important than its life in the body. Our life, the time that our soul spends inside of the body, is actually more important than what our soul was doing before it was born and where the soul goes after the body dies. Indeed, take a look at what God responds to the soul, which we read about in text number 4, the soul that didn't want to be born into the body. Take a look at what God responds to the soul that doesn't want to descend into a human body, doesn't want to be born into a little baby. Let's take a look at what God says. This from the Medrash on page 13, text number 7. God hurries to reassure the descending soul. The world to which I am bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul. We are born. When we're born, God says, I'm sorry, you don't have a choice. He literally gives us a kick in the tuchas and he sends us downstairs. We're born into a human body because God says this is the ultimate purpose of it all. I know you're more comfortable up in heaven, says God, but we're not asking you to be comfortable. It's not about where you're comfortable. It's what you're needed for. And you're needed for your life in this world, right? Ask not what you can do. Ask not what America can do for you. Ask what you can do for America, right? Ask not what the world can do for you. Ask what you can do for the world. That's what God tells the soul. Maybe JFK got it from here. That the purpose of life, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life. So there's certainly not an option to have a flippant approach to life. As much as we realize that the body is just temporary and the body is not really alive on its own, the body is just a vehicle for the soul. At the same time, we do see that this world is far more important than heaven. Take a look at text number 8, right? Text number 8, look what it says about the importance of this world. A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all the world to come. So one mitzvah, if you did a mitzvah for 10 seconds in this world, you gave it tzedakah donation, you laid tefillin, you lit a Shabbos candle, you called someone that was in distress and you picked up their spirits, that one mitzvah you spent 25 seconds doing is more important than all of the life in heaven. Now, how do we reconcile these two ideas? On the one hand, we say that the soul doesn't want to come down to this world. The soul is much more important than the body. But at the same time, now we're saying that it's life inside of the body that is most important. So is the body important or is the body not important? It seems to be a conflict. And here we start to see that the Torah's approach to life and death is nuanced and sophisticated, while the eternal soul is certainly more comfortable in heaven. Its ultimate purpose is here on this earth, and this begins to help us understand the tragedy of death and why we mourn and why we cry over death. In text number 9, we'll see that God makes the world's purpose very, very clear. He put us on this earth. That is the ultimate purpose of all of existence, of the heavens and the earth, the higher worlds and the lower worlds. All of creation was in order for us to be on this earth to do a mitzvah. Take a look. Text number 9, page 14 from the Talmud. God created the universe on a condition. If the Jews accept the Torah, he told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they say no, if they do not accept the Torah, I will return you to nothingness. The world will simply cease to exist. Not only is the earth subject to Torah, but even the heavens are subject to Torah. God doesn't need paradise. He created paradise. He created what we're going to learn about in lesson 2 and 3 of this course, where the soul goes after we die. All of that is just a reward for our efforts in this world. But think about it this way. Imagine you have a wedding. You're planning a wedding. You're excited. Your child is getting married, and you book a wedding hall. This is before the pandemic. You book a wedding hall, and you get a photographer and a flower person, and dresses and caterers and bartenders and all sorts of exciting vendors. And then, God forbid, a few days before the wedding, the bride gets cold feet, groom gets cold feet. They call off the wedding. So what happens now? If there's no wedding, are you going to say, well, I guess we have all this food, so we might as well have a party? Said nobody ever. I mean, nobody wants to have a party under such circumstances. You tell the photographer, you tell the flower lady, you tell all the vendors, listen, I'm sorry, but we're not interested in any sort of celebration whatsoever. If we've missed the essence, then everything else is totally meaningless. The wedding, in this case, is this world where we do mitzvahs. This is where God desires a relationship with us. If we can fulfill the mitzvahs, if we can study God's Torah, we've developed a meaningful relationship for God in this world, that's terrific. If that doesn't happen, then even the highest heavens serve no purpose. And this is why life in this body, in this earth, is more valuable than anything. So in conclusion, thus far, just to wrap it up so far, the soul is much more comfortable up in heaven. But the purpose of our entire existence is exclusively upon this earth. The moment that we're no longer able to be upon this earth is a tragedy. Why? Why are we crying? Is not because we're no longer able to, because it's all over. That's not why we're crying. We're not crying because it's all over. The reason why we're crying is because we're no longer able to be useful. We're no longer able to make a meaningful difference. I'm just going to go just a little bit further before I take the questions. And I see the questions are mounting up in the chat box here. This approach, this nuanced approach, expresses itself in conflicted feelings for the soul. Where on the one hand, the soul does not want to come down to this earth, but once the soul does come down to this earth and feel the purpose for which it serves, now it doesn't want to leave the party. Right? It's a lot like they say between the difference between the Jews and the Gentiles. About how you tell the difference between a Jew and a Gentile is how they say goodbye. The Gentiles, they leave without saying goodbye. The Jews, they say goodbye, but they never leave, right? So here we are. When we reach this earth, we never want to leave. Take a look at text number 10, page 15 in the book, from the Mishnah Ethics of the Fathers. Against your will, you're formed. We spoke about that, how we're born against our will. God literally pushes us down the slide, and he says, you're going to be born into this baby's body. And against your will, you're born. But together with that, the flip side is that against your will, you live. And against your will, you die. So yes, we don't want to live in this earth because we're far more comfortable up in heaven as a soul. But once we are upon this earth, we don't want to leave because we sense the value, the importance of our purpose on this earth. We have anxiety to descend down below, and we have anxiety or reluctance to leave the playing field. So we very much do want to live, but at the same time, the idea that I'm hoping you're starting to feel is that death doesn't frighten us. Because the only thing that happens at death is that we can no longer fulfill our purpose on this earth. But it's not that we're dead. It's not that we're terminated. It's not that it's all over. It's not final. It's not the last stop. That only pertains to the body, but to our true eternal soul, to our true essence, our true sense of self, that is forever. And therefore, there's nothing to be afraid of in that sense. You know, people try. Somebody asked earlier about, do we live on forever only in memory? And you know, that's a very common perspective in American thought, that people try to leave a legacy because they want to make sure that they'll be remembered in a certain way after they die. You know that Alfred Nobel was famous for killing more people than anyone else on the face of this earth. He invented dynamite. So one day, the newspapers thought that he had died. It was actually his brother died, but they thought it was him. So they published an obituary in the newspaper. They said the doctor of death has died. And when Alfred Nobel realized that he was going to be remembered as the doctor of death, he had no children, but he had a lot of money from all of his patents. He was a scientist. He developed the Nobel Prizes, which were designed to serve as a legacy to sponsor education and culture and peace and whatever else. And that's how we know him today. We remember Alfred Nobel as the guy that was, the Nobel Prizes. We don't remember him as the guy that killed more people than anybody else. We want to invest a lot of time in how we're going to be remembered. But the Torah says you don't need to do that. The Torah's approach is that we are essentially alive always, not just artificially, not just metaphorically. I want to give a practical expression of this idea from a story that happened with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson in Brooklyn, New York, he passed away in 1994. His father-in-law, his predecessor, was the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. And when he was living in Russia, in Soviet Russia, he was defying the communists by teaching Torah and sending rabbis and rebbitzins all over Russia to teach Aleph Beis, to open shuls, to open mikvahs, to open schools, to teach Torah, to slaughter kosher animals. And the Russians, the communists, the Soviets were after him. So take a look at this piece from his diary. He was put into jail, and they almost took his life. It says over there, text number 11, student page, it's page 16 in the textbook. The previous Rebbe writes as follows. He says, I arrived for interrogation at the offices of the Soviet GPU. That's the predecessor of the NKVD, which is the predecessor of the KGB. However, in keeping with my principles, I was not very cooperative, said the Rebbe. One of the interrogators raised a revolver that sat on the desk before him. He looked me in the eye and he mockingly said, this small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths. Under its spell, even the mutes have become talkative. You know, they wanted information on the names of the rabbis and rebbitzins around Russia that were teaching Judaism. I responded, said the Rebbe, you are quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on faint-hearted non-believers. Those with one world and multiple gods. But we, on the other hand, who have one God and two worlds, as such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever. You see, the previous Rebbe understood that life is my soul. Your gun cannot impact my soul. There's nothing that your gun can do to my soul. I do want to live, because I have a mission on this earth, but I'm not afraid of death. His approach to death, as you see in his writings, is one of serenity, is one of equanimity. The Jewish approach to death is rejecting the fear of death. We're fully alive. We know that when we die, we're fully alive. It's only our bodies that have passed. We have no fear of death, and that's the resolution to thanatophobia. We're not afraid of death when we understand what life is, that life is the eternal soul. I'd like to just give you one more example from the Talmud of a sage that was crying over his death. Why would he be crying over his own death? This was Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. Rabbi Yehuda the Prince on page number 17, text number 12. It's a story from the Talmud that teaches us so much. When Rabbi Yehuda the Prince fell ill and he lay in his deathbed, Rabbi Chia entered and he found him weeping. He found the Rabbi Yehuda weeping. "My master," exclaimed Rabbi Chia, "why? Why do you weep?" Was it not taught if one dies smiling, it is a good sign for him, while weeping, it is a bad sign for him? Rabbi Chia was amazed that Rabbi Yehuda was crying over his own death. What are you afraid of? Who's afraid of death? I never heard of such a ridiculous thing. What does he answer? Rabbi Yehuda replied, he makes it very clear to us the only thing that we don't like about death. I weep because of my inability to study the Torah and observe the commandments after death. No longer am I able to fulfill my purpose once I die from this physical world. You see, death is not something to be feared. It's just a lack of purpose. It's like moving into a retirement home. Think about it. When you're moving into a retirement home, you're still alive. In fact, life is pretty good. You know, they serve you food. There's probably room service. It's nice. All is provided for. But would you rather be working? Would you rather be driving yourself around? Would you rather have that sense of fulfillment and achievement and overcoming obstacles? Or do you want to just be staying there, relaxing all day long, relaxing on the beach? You know, there was a beautiful story of a rabbi who basically told his students that I can tell you what you prayed for in Yom Kippur, and I can tell you what heaven responded to you. He was known as the Chose of Lublin. The Chose of Lublin. It was right, the seer, the prophet of Lublin. He lived about 150 years ago. He said this to his students at the end of Yom Kippur. So one student, a brave student, approached and he said, "Rebbe, tell me, what did I pray for?" So the Rebbe, the Chose, the Rebbe of Lublin said, "You reasoned with God and you said that if every person's livelihood is determined during the days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? Therefore, why don't you just give me a conduit? Let me work 1 day a week, and I'll spend the other 6 days of the week immersed in prayer and study. That's what you prayed for." The student was breathless. He said, "Yes, that's exactly what I prayed for." What was the response? What did they say in heaven? And the Rebbe responded, "The angels that were transporting your prayers to the heavenly throne were amused by your request. Had God wanted you to study and pray 6 days a week without the burdens of this world, he would never have sent you down to this world in the first place. He could have made you into an angel. God wants you to be, he wants you to be farmatert, to work hard, as we say in Yiddish. He wants you to schwitz, to sweat, because that's our purpose on this earth. If life was meant to be easy, he would have put us straight up into heaven." So let me take a moment to address some of the questions that are coming in here on the chat box. Okay, Ira, so visiting a loved one at the cemetery, is it only to make one feel better as our loved one is not there? No. So Ira, Ike, we're going to address this question in lesson 3, which is our relationship with our loved ones after they pass from this world. There's a very important reason why we visit our loved ones, because a part of their soul actually stays at the grave. We'll address that in lesson 3. Russell, nowadays, with so many Jews turning their back on Torah, are they returned to nothingness? Are they returned to nothingness? Oh, so you asked text number 9, right? When we said if the Jews don't accept the Torah. So we got to make sure that we're studying Torah. We got to make sure that we don't neglect the Torah. But I have to tell you, Russell, that's the reason why it's so important for us. We have 5,150 something Chabad houses around the world, every little corner where there's Jewish people in the world. We open Chabad houses because we want to make sure that every last Jew, that no Jews left behind. We want to make sure that every Jew has an opportunity to do a mitzvah, to study Torah, and that's all of our responsibility to do that. So we should hope that that doesn't happen. Susan, can people feel that they have finished their mission and it's okay to leave? I think that if you're still alive, it means that you still have a purpose in this world. If you were born, if you woke up in the morning breathing, it means that God wants you still to do something in this world. We'll talk about purpose and mission later on in this course. Okay, Andy, how do we know God's will for time of death? Okay, can it be that a doctor prolonging life works against God versus it being a test of the doctor's willingness or ability to save a life? So, generally speaking, Andy, it's like this. We are commanded to preserve our souls, to preserve our lives. Like we learned, the importance of life in this world is very, very, very important. At the same time, what I'm about to tell you is very, very controversial. What I'm about to tell you is very emotional. And you're probably going to have a very difficult time with it. I'm only mentioning as a tangent. I really hope it's not going to blow up the direction of this class, but only because you asked, I'm going to mention it. I mentioned it to a person here on this group who recently lost her son. And I have to admit that I also struggle with this personally. And none of us should ever be tested with what I'm about to tell you. When it comes to the length of our lives, we are born with a predetermined amount of life, and no human being is able to shorten that time of life. No matter how a person died, whether it was through a drunken driver, whether it was through a terrorist in a synagogue in Pittsburgh or Poway, whether it was through even suicide or an illness or a doctor or malpractice, a person cannot leave this world before the time that God has predetermined. Okay? We are able to appeal for lengthening, for an extension, and that's what we pray for, right? We pray for that. If there's a decree to shorten our lives in heaven, then we are able to appeal for an extension. But what I am saying to you, and again, this is very, very controversial, and I apologize if it's so controversial, but if you've lost a loved one in a way that you felt was unfair, I just want you to consider the notion that every one of us is born with a very limited, predetermined time of life. And the moment we're born, it's already determined, the time, the hour, the minute of our passing. Okay? And therefore, the Daniel Pearl case that Ed is asking about, same thing. If he was murdered by terrorists, it still means that was his time, that his time was up. And if you have cancer and if you use treatment, does this go against the Torah? You're supposed to have treatment as much as possible. We have discussed in a different course called Medicine and Morals and Life in the Balance. We discussed about how much pain you have to go in order to prolong life if it's very difficult. So I don't want to get into that right now, but generally, I think the general idea is something which I think we can relate to right now. iPad, Ronald is asking a question. Can our soul meet the souls of relatives who predeceased us? Very interesting question. Because our soul is forever, our soul knows its relatives, both in this world and in the previous world. And it's a known thing that when a person passes from this world, the soul that's dying is greeted by its loved ones before leaving this world. I was sitting at the Shabbos table in my house in South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa, with my whole family, all my 8 siblings and my parents, and my Zayda, my Saba, my mother's father, who survived Auschwitz. He was like 80-something years old at the time in a wheelchair. And he was very, very not well. He was sort of sleeping and waking up. Suddenly he woke up and he said, I just saw my sister and my brother and my wife. And he sent us regards, and we thought he had totally lost it. We had no idea what he was talking about. A moment later, a few moments later, he woke up and he said, I saw the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He wasn't even a Chabadnik. He wasn't even a Lubavitcher Chassid. He said, I saw the Rebbe. And we were like, okay, sounds interesting. A few days later, he passed away. So Ronald, I just want you to know that as a rabbi, I see people very close to death in many cases. And I just want you to know that this is a very real thing, that the souls of our loved ones do indeed come to greet the soul and to escort the soul over to the next world. Do Jews believe being able to contact the soul through a seance? That's very interesting questions, Russell. That a seance is prohibited by the Torah. The reason it's prohibited by the Torah is not because it's fake. The reason it's prohibited is because it's
My
real.
screen.
The reason it's prohibited is because it's real. Now, not everybody that says they can do a seance is actually doing a seance. There's a lot of fakers. There's a lot of charlatans out there. But that being putting that aside, the answer is yes, there is such a thing as if somebody really knows what they're doing. In fact, there's a story in the Torah, Russell, about King Saul, who needed to speak to Samuel, the prophet who had already died, and he brought him back from the dead, and he asked him a question about the war that was coming up. And there was a whole conversation in the Torah about that episode. Okay, when the soul completes its mission, Doris, can they come back more than once, and do we have the same players in our mortal life in different roles? So that is all about reincarnation. I'm going to save that for lesson 5. Big hot topic, I see, reincarnation. I'm going to save that for lesson 5. The general answer is yes. When you're not finished your mission, we'll talk about that. When and how does the soul contact us? I'm not sure about that question. Final 2 questions coming in. I am saying that life is always predetermined. Is heaven really above? No, heaven's not really above. It's like saying music. Where is music? Is music above us? Is music below us? Is 1 + 1 = 2 next to us? It's not anywhere. It's a higher dimension. We speak in a metaphoric term when we speak about above. Lifespans are always predetermined. Yes, unless you appeal for an extension in prayer. That was that controversial point that I brought up. Gladys, but we have to face the fact that there are many Jews that are secular and some do not even recognize Judaism. I've been told by one who said, I'll never believe in God. I have to tell you, Gladys, with respect, I don't believe in a Jew who doesn't believe in God. When I meet an atheist who tells me that he doesn't believe in God, my standard response to him is, I don't believe in atheists, right? I don't believe in atheists. I believe that a Jew deep down, when you realize who you are, that your essence is a piece of God, how can you deny your essence? Interesting conversation to think about. 5th commandment, Andy, honor your parents, carries life extension shortening with it. So that's an adjustment to the predetermined length. Lots to talk about that. It says, and you will live long if you honor your parents. It doesn't say shortened, but yeah, there is such a concept over there. Owner, when people are sick and dying, do they have relatives who died contacting them? Again, I'm not sure. I'm not getting in too much into that, but generally speaking, there is such a thing as relatives from the other world connecting over to this world. I'm just going to go a little bit further to try to wrap up our syllabus here for tonight by saying that what we've learned so far is that life is beyond death. We're not talking so much about an afterlife on a linear level, as much as we're talking about life being completely beyond death. It's untouchable by death because by definition, our soul is immortal, is eternal, is forever. This sophisticated approach affects not only how we view death after we die, but also how we view the very quality of our lives through our choices. You see, the Talmud tells us something fascinating. The Talmud tells us that the righteous, the tzaddikim, never die. That's in text number 13. It says that the righteous never die. What does that mean? Why would it only be the righteous that never die? Don't we all have souls? And the answer is that life is not the time between birth and death. Life is the choices that we make that relate to the eternal soul. So it all depends on how you lived your life. If you lived a life of vanity, then all of that dies with your body. But if you lived a life of soulfulness, a life of meaning and purpose and spirituality and Torah and mitzvahs and godliness, like a tzaddik, it lives forever. The question is only where you have invested your efforts. You know, the cemetery in Hebrew is called a Beit HaKvarot, which means a house of graves. It's also known as a Beit HaChaim, the house of life. The same place, the house of graves and the house of life. Why? Because it all depends on how you lived your life. If your life was about the body, then it's all over. But if your life was about the soul, was about love, emotion, connection, purpose, mission, Torah, mitzvahs, then that is a house of life. This is where your soul is able to soar free from the shackles that tie it down in this world. And that's the reason why tzaddikim don't die, the righteous don't die, because their life values are as described in text number 14. Their life values are spiritual values. You know, there's a beautiful story of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, the first Chabad Rebbe, who wanted to once bless a chassid of his with great wealth. Rabbi Kusil Lepler. I want you to think for a moment, what would you do if your Rebbe, the great Rebbe, wanted to bless you with wealth? What would you say? I can just imagine what you would say. Stephanie, I can see what you say. Right? You're saying, bring it on, right? Well, Kusil Lepler, the chassid of the Alter Rebbe, he's the author of the Tanya. He says to his Rebbe, thanks, but no thanks. I don't need a life of wealth that's going to distract me from my purpose in this world. So then he said, okay, the Rebbe said, how about if I bless you with longevity, with long life? What would you say to that one? Nancy's all for it, absolutely, right? Well, guess what Rabbi Kusil Lepler says to the Alter Rebbe? He says, this chutzpahdik answer. He says, okay, I'll take it. But, aber nicht kein puyerische Jahren, as long as the extension of life that you're going to bless me with is not peasant years. Peasant years, and what he meant by peasant years, they were living in agricultural society. A life where our eyes do not see. We have eyes, but we don't see. We have ears, but we don't hear. We don't sense the godliness that's all around us. In other words, if you're able to bless me with longevity, with extra years of life, of health, where I'm able to study Torah and I'm able to observe the mitzvahs in a way which is profound and meaningful, I'll take it with open arms. But if all you want to give me is just an extra 20 years where I'm going to be running to the doctor and I'm going to be worried about my wealth and the stock market and everything else, that I'm going to be all distracted, then what do I need that for? It's just, what's the point? Rabbi Kusil Lepler teaches us, the story teaches us that it's not, that what counts is not the years in our life, but the life in our years. It's not the years in our life, but the life in our years that counts. That's what this is all about. And here, we finally are able to realize that so much beyond the one-dimensional perception of death which we are typically exposed to, we realize that life is everything to do with the soul. Death is everything to do with the body. When we make choices and live our lives consistent with the values and purpose and intention and desires and needs of our soul, then we are already living a life which is beyond death. We can be dead when we are alive. And we can be alive when we are dead. It all depends on our choices. And that's why God begs us. God in the Torah in text 15 begs us. I'm putting before you two choices, life and death. And guess which one I want you to choose, says God in text number 15. I want you to choose life. Like we need God to tell me to choose life. Obviously, who in their right mind would not choose life? The answer is, let's take a look. Text 15. Behold, I have set, page 20, text 15. Behold, I have set before you today life and goodness and death and evil. The term life in this verse does not refer to corporeal life, nor does death refer to the result of the soul's departure, for which simpleton needs to be instructed to choose to live and not to die. You got to be suicidal. Rather, each creation, while alive and fully existent, contains both life and death. The physicality of the object is intrinsically lifeless. It is in a constant state of decline and deterioration. We observe this decline in every physical object, as well as in ourselves. Our physical capacities and powers weaken with time. By contrast, the spiritual and the divine within each thing is alive, eternal, and not subject to destruction or deterioration. God forbid. What the Torah is telling us, what God is begging us to do, is saying, I'm begging you to choose, to make choices that allow you to be alive, even now for always. Even when you're dead, you'll be alive. Even when your body is dead, you'll still be alive. And even when you're alive, you'll certainly not be dead. We have it all depends on why we do what we do. You know, we all eat breakfast, but the question is, why do we eat breakfast? If we eat breakfast just to satisfy our stomachs, that's death. But if we're eating breakfast in order to be able to have the strength to study Torah, to do mitzvahs, to make money, to give charity, to do good things, that's spiritual, that's life, that's purpose, that's eternal. We now have new depth to that analogy from the Mishnah, from the Ethics of the Fathers about the corridor and the palace, how this world is the corridor which leads to the palace, which is the world to come. You see, it's not only about the primacy, the importance of the next world over this one. It's about our priorities while in this world. A spiritual life in this world is already the palace. When we're in this world, we can already be in the palace. We don't need to wait until we leave this world. We can experience eternal life already in this world through our choices. And that's why the previous Rebbe said to that KGB interrogator, he said, I have no fear of your little toy. He wasn't saying to him that if you kill me, I have another world waiting for me. No, that's not what he said. He said, rather, I am unkillable. Because I am already eternally alive, my life is all about the neshama. My life is all about the soul. Life, therefore, friends, in conclusion, life is not before death. Life is not after death. Life is beyond death. And in closing, I'd like to say that we started out tonight explaining that the Jewish approach mitigates the fear of death. But when we developed the theme further, we realized that our understanding of death enhanced our understanding of life, and it enhanced our quality of life. It helped us understand that instead of being afraid of death in and of itself, we realized that we can enhance the quality of our lives, making ourselves eternal right here, right now. The more things we do that are eternal, the more immortal we become already now. Now, this is not all or nothing. You don't have to become a Rebbe overnight, either a peasant, a puyer, or a Rebbe. It's a spectrum. There's like a needle on the mortality spectrum. Every single one of us has this needle, which is on the mortality spectrum. Far left would be very body. Far right would be very soul. And where do you feature on the mortality spectrum? If you're leaning towards the left, you're very, very body. You could be dead while you're alive. If your life is all about the next golf stroke, maybe there's not much to it. But if there's more to your life, purpose and meaning and mission, then your needle is moving much closer to the right. And it's all about more soul, more life. More body is just about more fear. And in conclusion, I'd like to encourage you on page 21 to do the exercise on exercise 1.2. To try to record one point from today's lesson that resonates with you most personally, and to try to identify a single adjustment that you can introduce to your life for the sake of living in a manner that is more alive and more consistent with your immortal soul. I'm just going to take a look at the questions here a second before I do the summary video. So Helen is asking, you skipped my question. I'm so sorry, concerning soul and one's personality. I didn't see the question, Helen. I'm sorry. I got a lot going on my screen here. Does your soul reflect on one's personality, Warren? Yes, the soul has a lot to do with your personality. This is an idea which we learn in Tanya a lot, that your soul has 10 expressions through 3 intellectual and 7 emotional, and your personality has a lot to do with the expression of your soul, even though on an essence level, your soul is just a piece of God, which is forever immortal and eternal. Friends, I'm just going to show the summary video, and we'll take questions right after that. We'll do live questions right after that, okay? So just bear with me a moment as I share with you the summary video right now, in just a moment. Give me a second here.
Lesson 1. Demystifying Death. 1. The awareness of our mortality and the resulting natural fear of death influence many elements of our psyche, behavior, and life choices. Our perspective on death influences multiple areas of our lives. 2. The neshama, human soul, the true essence of the human being, is eternal.
So sorry. Oops. My computer jammed for a second. Hold on. Sorry, I touched something.
Precedes the body and continues to exist after the body is gone. While still in heaven, it does not desire to descend into a body, and when the time of death arrives, it resumes its native spiritual state. 3. The fact that the briefest spiritual experience of the next world is more pleasurable than all of this world does not diminish the reality that even a brief stay in this world is more important than all of the next. Therefore, Jewish law gives precedence to preserving life over nearly every mitzvah. 4. This perspective allows us to appreciate and value life without fear of death. 5. While our corporeal needs and endeavors die with the body, our soul-focused aspiration and identify with eternal values, our current life continues even after the body's demise.
So what we're going to do, just to give you a heads up, is that next week, just before we take questions live in a few short moments, next week, what we're going to be doing is addressing the experience of death from the soul's perspective and its relationship with us living mortals. The following week, in lesson 3, we'll talk about the experience of death, not from the soul's perspective, but from our mortal perspective. When we lose a loved one, the process of grieving, death, bereavement, and mourning from our perspective. So that's what's coming up. And I'd like to open it up right now for questions. Just before I do that, questions and comments. Just before I do that, I would like to thank everybody that has joined us here tonight. It's really been a pleasure to be with you. And if you could stick around for the questions. If you haven't yet signed up for the course, then I hope that you will. And if you could just let Ashley know, Ashley Stoneman, she can help you with the arrangements of the books and everything else. Ashley's right here on the screen, or at jewishgardens.com/RSVP. That's jewishgardens.com/RSVP. So I'm going to start off with a question that I see is on the screen. Lisa, perhaps it's not the fear of death, but the sadness experience. I'm not sure what you were referring to with this. Lisa, do you want to unmute yourself and let me know what exactly you're referring to? Or anybody else that would like to ask a question or a comment?
So it's not the fear of death, but those that are left living, it's the sadness experienced of saying goodbye, even though we know the soul is still.
Exactly. Yes, 100%. 100%. So Lisa, I want to just validate that and say that the point that I was making is that we're not crying because of the finality of death. It's not the end of life. But we are crying, like you say, over the fact that we'll miss you until we see you on the other side. I have to tell you, Lisa, you remind me of a story of a family that lost a child. And they came to the Rebbe. Someone told them that if you go to the Rebbe will help you. They were by the Rebbe for 20 minutes. The father was just inconsolable, completely and utterly inconsolable. And he went into private audience with the Rebbe. I'm not sure with his wife, without his wife, I don't remember. But when he came out 15 minutes later, the guy was a changed person. So people asked him, what happened in there? What did the Rebbe tell you? And he said that the Rebbe asked me if I could know that my son was okay, would I feel better? And I said, yes. And if I could be able to send him care packages, would that help? And I said, of course. So the Rebbe said to him, you should just know that your son is alive. He moved out of your house and he moved to the apartment above you. He's living upstairs, which means he's still alive. He used to be in your apartment, in your condo, but now he's one floor up. So to get to see him, you got to sort of get out in the elevator, up the stairs, and go to the next. It's more of a hassle to see him, but you know that he's there, just like us on this Zoom presentation. We used to have this class in person. We used to gather together at the shul. We used to sit around the table and see each other. It was amazing. Now, we're not really seeing each other. We're sort of sensing each other through the Zoom screen. Does that mean that we're not alive? No, it just means that we've changed platforms. We've moved a little bit. And when you're able to internalize that idea, it mitigates the pain of death dramatically. But like you say, Lisa, there certainly is a sense of loss in the fact that we can't see you in the flesh and blood right here, right now, like we used to. Thank you, Lisa. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions or comments? Thoughts, perspectives? Reflections on what we spoke about. If you'd like to say something, please do unmute yourself. Anyone else would like to say something? Don't be shy. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments. If something you're struggling with.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the Rebbe was saying that he's okay, he's in his own apartment, but you can't contact him, right? Because he said that that's against the Torah.
I'm sorry, who's speaking? I can't see who's
I'm
speaking.
sorry, it's Cindy.
Oh, it's Cindy. I'm sorry, your screen didn't turn yellow, so I couldn't see you.
Sorry.
Yes, you cannot contact him in the old way, but you can contact him in the new way. You see, Cindy, if I wanted to see you, I can't see you because you're up in New Jersey somewhere, right? But if I wanted to see someone that's in Palm Beach Gardens, I'd be able to drive over and see him. But now if I want to see that same person, I need to go into a thing called Zoom. And I want to congratulate Jill, who got into Zoom tonight for the first time, I think, this pandemic. I know it was a process for you, so congratulations. And you need to get onto this thing called Zoom and enter a certain code and whatever, some numbers, and then you get to see that person. So there's a different way, Cindy, of seeing that person. While we're alive in a body, we're able to connect through milk and cookies and lunch and dinner and restaurants and drinks and all sorts of nice things. But after we are no longer alive in a body, when we're disembodied, when the soul is freed from the body, now we connect to the soul in the soul's language. What's the soul's language? Kaddish, charity, in the memory of the soul. Mitzvahs, like we're going to learn about in subsequent lessons of this course. So it's only that it's changed, and that's what the Rebbe was saying. You can send them care packages. It's just different kind of care packages. It's not delivered by FedEx or UPS or even by USPS. It's delivered by synagogue courier services, right? Or other kind of services which don't have to be in the synagogue. Thank you for your question, Cindy.
I have a question.
Yes, Susan.
How many times does the soul come back?
Okay, so that's a reincarnation question. I'll answer you in a nutshell. That the Arizal, that Kabbalist that we read about earlier, he says that it's no more, in the Kabbalah it says no more than 7 times. We only have 7 opportunities to come back to this earth, yeah.
Okay, and then when you no longer have an opportunity, have you completed
By the way,
everything?
let me just explain. For those people that might be new to reincarnation, it might be a little bit of a shocker idea if you're new to the idea. Reincarnation means when a soul leaves this earth and it needs to come back into a body. It obviously doesn't come back into the original body, so it goes into a different body, like a baby. Somebody said before about their grandson named after the mother or something, right? So that would be a reincarnation idea where the child bears the soul of someone earlier. And to your question now, Susan, it's got to do with the mission of the soul in this earth. If the mission was not yet fulfilled, it has to come back for a rerun, right?
So when I said, a peace in the beginning, what how do I feel about death? And I said peaceful and peaceful. I think, does it ever come? So after these 7 times, maybe you can stay up there. You don't, you'll never have that feeling of not wanting to come back.
Well, we'll talk about that in more
Okay.
detail. I want to
Okay.
save that for that class. Yeah, so let's save that idea for that class. But
Okay.
hopefully tonight, my hope is that at least the fear and anxiety associated with death is something which we could mitigate, as we realize that we are unkillable, we are undieable, we are immortal by the mere definition of who we are. Losing a loved one is impossibly difficult, and the tears are endless. But we can draw strength in the awareness and realization that our loved one is not gone and does not only live on in our photo albums, but that our loved one is actually alive and well, albeit not in a physical body, but on some sort of a Zoom screen. You know, there's a lady in our community. She was looking forward to her youngest grandson's bar mitzvah, and she told me she was very sad that she was only able to do the bar mitzvah on Zoom. I said to her, Maxine, that means that you celebrated it together with Murray. Murray is her husband, who's deceased. He passed away about 10, 12 years ago, more even. And she was very sad that he passed away. So I said, Murray was there without being there in person in a physical body. You also were at the bar mitzvah in the same exact way that your beloved husband was. Also, he was there just without a body. Both of us showed up. I mean, look at you. All of you right now are inside of the Chabad Palm Beach Gardens, just without a body. Think about it. You're right here. You're in the building. You can see exactly what's going on. You're just without a body. Your consciousness without a body. I think that Zoom is the most unbelievable metaphor, manifestation of what life is really all about. That you don't need to have a body in order to be alive. You don't, 100 years ago, people would think you're absolutely out of your mind. If you said, yeah, I just went to a bar mitzvah in Israel, and then I went to a wedding in Vancouver, all in the same day. They'd be like, how's that even possible? Without leaving my house in Palm Beach, Florida, right? How's that even possible? Today, it's like, everyone knows that you can do that. So this idea of being somewhere without being there with your body is something that we could never relate to 100 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago. But modern technology has finally caught up with what the Torah has been telling us for thousands of years. You don't need to be physically present in order to be somewhere. Where your consciousness is, says the Baal Shem Tov, is where you are.
That's a good purpose of the COVID. COVID taught us that.
Maybe that's a silver lining that COVID might have taught us.
Yeah.
The value of living a more spiritual life. That life is not only about where your body is. Life has a lot more to do with where your soul is. And that's why I say to people when I greet them, I say, no, how you doing? I'd say, Raz, how you feeling? How's your neshama doing today? Right? How's your neshama doing today? People always do like a bit of a double take. Like, what do you mean, how's my soul doing today? I never thought about that, actually. How is my soul doing today? Right? Have you fed your soul breakfast today? Have you given it the oxygen, the hydration, the food that it needs? Or have you only taken care of the needs of your body? So as a rabbi, I try to help people remember that you also have a neshama. And in fact, that's really who you are. So friends, I want to thank you for joining me here tonight. It's such a pleasure being with you here tonight. We continue this course every Thursday night for the next 5 Thursday nights consecutively. On Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Would love to hear from you, your personal thoughts and feelings and reflections. If they're more personal, obviously, and you don't want to share them on in front of the whole group, that's fine. Would love to hear them and to engage with you in writing. So thank you for joining me here. My email address again is rabbi@jewishgardens.com. We'll be sending you a recording. Ashley will be sending you a recording of this class into your inbox, as well as a summary, so you can review it and watch it if you need to get a refresher. It's not an easy concept to become familiar with, but we'll be doing that for all the classes. And if you want to invite any friends or family to join us, please just let Ashley know and she can share with them the various information. The beauty is that you don't have to be anywhere in order to participate. This is about life without being physically present. So thank you again, everybody, for joining me here tonight. I'm going to sign off and thank you.